And to the analysis of Shields and Brooks, that is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, gentlemen, on this Friday. So this week, 3 days of hearings before the Supreme Court on the president's health care reform law. David, what did you make of it all?
Well, it's, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but it certainly sent shockwaves through Washington. People have been overconfident. I think the views of the conservatives have been underreported for months and months, and their views slighted. And it turns out the serious concerns, and I don't pretend to pass judgment, but it strikes me as a perfectly valid constitutional issue. Basically what the individual mandate does, it compels people to enter into a contract with an insurance company, which is not really in their best interest, in order to subsidize other people who were forced to enter into that contract. That strikes me as as a step forward in executive or governmental power. So it strikes me as a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I can see why morally we are all responsible for each other's health. We're not going to let somebody die on the street. But constitutionally, why the government should be compelling people to do this, that strikes me as a completely valid concern, and the justices honed right in on that one.
So what did you hear, Mark?
What I heard, Judy, was a political discussion. I mean, a reminder that a judge is a lawyer who's appointed to that office by a politician. It struck me as rather remarkable to hear justices of the United States Supreme Court reciting lines that were actually questions that were written by the Tea Party opposition to the law. David's point is a legitimate one. It's a question, I don't know, it's not to my advantage. I think it is to my advantage to have everybody in society covered by health insurance as it is now. If someone is forced to go to an emergency room, we do cover all the expenses, and at a cost to everybody, and that's the right thing to do to cover it. But I think most of all, it hit me that the change in 2 years. I mean, there's no question the political sea change.
You mean since the law
was passed, there was a confidence on the part of the administration and the White House that once people became aware of this, there'd be a change. And people like Ken Cuccinelli, who was the Attorney General of Virginia, and other conservatives saying, no, they're going to challenge this to the Supreme Court. They were dismissed. They were treated with some disdain. And you could see this grow to the point where it's not only possible, it may be plausible that this law will be overturned, if not in entirety, in part.
So did you hear the justices reciting Tea Party lines?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I ran into some judges this week who said it went on too long. There was no reason for it to go on 3 full days, or not full days, but 3 days. And so on the fringes, it's true there were some political statements made. There were some comments, inaccurate comments in summary of the bill. And so that was there, no question. But at the core, there was this core issue. Does the government, we all know that if you enter into a relationship, the government has the power to regulate it. Does the government has the power to compel you to enter into a relationship? And that strikes me as a purely constitutional matter, a role of government matter. And there are many ways to get people to have universal coverage. And it's worth remembering when Barack Obama was running for president, he was against the individual mandate because he thought it would be ineffective. You couldn't enforce it. You could tax people and pay them. You could give people strong economic incentives to get universal coverage. But compelling that mandate, which was the most politically convenient, is far from the only way to get there.
So you're saying that was the right argument to have over the mandate, over the validity of the mandate. Mark,
I think the argument they went to the point that is the vulnerability, and it was a point that Democrats they came to out of a sense of necessity, political necessity. The mandate had its origins, the individual mandate, some 20 years ago, when Bill Clinton and Hillary Rodham Clinton, the president and first lady, the Democratic administration, came up with their health care plan. And this was the Republican rebuttal. It was hatched at the Heritage Foundation, a Republican conservative think tank here in town. It was backed by Republicans. And David's absolutely right in his recitation of history, that candidate Obama opposed it. Most Democrats opposed. Most Democrats wanted a single payer. At least the Democrats who were engaged and involved in this, they couldn't pass it. They didn't have the votes to pass it, and this was the compromise plan.
And I would say first, I'm for it as a matter of policy. I think the mandate is something you need if you're going to have a good system. As a matter of constitutional law, that's sort of different. And so we do have to respect the Constitution. One other thing I did want to say, and I've heard this from a lot of people, is we got to see the justices in a more high-tension setting than we normally do. And I can't tell you how many conservatives have told me this week, we were opposed to Sotomayor, but she's really good. And they were really impressed with her. I think Roberts was very good. I think Scalia is always flamboyant, but always super smart. But Sotomayor and Kagan, I think, really showed the public, who are the newest justices, how smart they are.
What was your take on the justices?
I think I can't make an assessment of the judge. I mean, I did not listen in its entirety. I dropped in and out and listened to our summaries. But I do want to say one thing about the court, and that is, at a time when American institutions are under siege, Gallup poll last year have a favorable or unfavorable evaluation of these following institutions. The court had been up pretty high. It had been 61% favorable. And after the Citizens United decision, when they opened up corporate contributions, unlimited corporate contributions for the first time in 100 years in American politics by a 5-4 vote, the court has dropped, and a decision that 80% of Americans, when polled, oppose. The court's favorability has dropped to 46%. And I think the court is in danger of becoming very much a political institution. The reality has been in the
political
past,
institution.
a political institution that becomes politicized as part of the political campaign. 50 years ago, Judy, it was not uncommon to see cars with bumper sticks on them impeach Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice, at a time when the court expanded civil liberties and civil rights and upset established order.
So are you saying you expect a political decision?
I expect a political reaction to the decision if, in fact, I think the losing side in this kind of a decision, high-profile, high-intensity decision, is where the political energy lies. I think the initial reaction, if the mandate is overturned, if the law itself is overturned, there'll be a celebratory victory lap by the part of the conservatives who've prevailed, and disdain for the president, the constitutional professor who didn't understand the Constitution. I think after that settles in, I think what you'll see is political energy on the Democratic side. Because once these rights and these changes have been repealed.
But just to make sure I hear you right, Mark, you're not saying the court is injecting politics into this.
I think
you're saying.
I think that it will be seen very much as a political decision. I mean, based upon the question, when you get Charles Fried, who was Ronald Reagan's solicitor, I mean, a very conservative Harvard professor, saying he just couldn't believe some of the questions that they sounded like they'd been written by the Tea Party. I mean, I think it does become part of the political dialogue. You would then have the Citizens United decision, the Bush v. Gore decision, and this decision in the space of 11 years, 12 years, that are serious political decisions that have all come down on one side.
Well, and that happened the opposite. I mean, Roe v. Wade. Both sides were pretty energized after that one. I don't see this having that kind of scope of Roe v. Wade, which has gone on forever. I frankly think what's going to happen, a lot of people on the left, the champions of the bill, will be furious, no question, if it's struck down. And we should emphasize we don't know what's going to happen. But as for the country at large, it's worth remembering the law is unpopular. And the latest study, and I think the best study, suggested that 25 Democrats in the House lost their seats because of this law, aside from the economy in 2010. So I think what's going to happen for most of the country is they'll say, fine. Not saying this minority, and I think on the electoral effect, it will actually help the Democrats because the Republicans are losing the economy as an issue as it improves. They are settling on health care as their #1 issue. And if that's taken away from them, it's tougher to run the sort of campaign they want to run.
So you're saying there wouldn't be the backlash or the reaction from
I
Democrats
think among real champions of the law, that it will be there.
I just agree with David on Roe v. Wade. I think the energy on Roe v. Wade was on the losing side. I mean, that's been kept alive by that led to an entire political movement. The pro-life, anti-abortion movement, and in part because it was seen that the court interrupted what had been the legislative and political process, and that this would be a case of the court for the first time in 70 years overturning a legislative act of this nature.
Just one other thing I want to ask you about. We're on the edge of our seats on this, and that is the budget. The House, Mark, overwhelmingly rejected the president's budget proposals, and they turned around and passed, along party lines, David, the Paul Ryan budget. What's not a shock that this happened, but what's the next step here? What happens?
We have an election.
Does it matter?
You know, they're
it's
staking
March.
it ground. We have an election. We wait till December, which is the cataclysm month when all sorts of things, bad fiscal things happen all at once. But I give Ryan credit. I don't agree with all parts of it, but he's taken a step forward. One of the saddest things that's happened this week is Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee, and others put together a Simpson-Bowles bill, sort of an outline, and had them vote on that. I think it got like 38 votes in the House. And so we're going to end up there eventually. I don't know when, before or after a fiscal crisis. We'll end up with something like Simpson-Bowles, but you see the two parties not wanting to get there yet.
With including tax increases.
Right, exactly.
But the Republicans aren't ready.
Right, and neither are the Democrats, apparently. Almost nobody voted for this thing.
The rejection of the Simpson-Bowles approach, I mean, is proof that bipartisanship is no longer on life support. It's dead in this city. I think the Ryan budget, which I think is, indefensible in a social sense, in a social justice sense, with a $394,000 tax cut for the average millionaire. I think what it is a blueprint that House Republicans are laying down right now for the lame duck session that follows the election. They have staked out their position, so that this is their negotiating position. Let the White House and the Democrats try and come up with it, but I think that's what they're doing. And plus, what they've done is they've stopped any cuts in the military that were agreed to last summer in the grand budget agreement last year, 2011.
And just quickly, real consequences of this. I mean, do people just say, "Oh, there goes Washington again"? I mean,
the near term, well, we see what the parties believe in. We don't see what they're going to do. So if you're looking for the practical consequences, zero.
I think there could be political consequences in the election. I think some of the cuts that the Republicans have voted for could become issues in certain House races.
Well, we are always thrilled. Our hearts race when you're here.
Oh my goodness,
Mark
Judy.
Shields, David Brooks, thank you both.